All right, in the middle of a heat wave that's kind of slowing me down, but I know some of my friends have it a whole lot harder than I do. And I also have to be thankful that in the new place, all of the big trees providing shades, making it a lot easier. Speaking of the new place, I talked about this in recent videos. The purchase, the move, other things that have recently happened in my life have spread my budget really thin, so I'm either on the lookout for affordable products to review or free samples. And today I kind of have both. My friend Adam at JXE JXO sent me a sample of what they're calling their camping hunting knife kit, which is primarily comprised of a small machete, I might call it a fro, and a smaller companion fixed blade. Also in the kit, you get nylon sheaths for both. You get a ferro rod and you get a little pocket sharpener, all for about currently $40 US at Amazon. I'll put the link down in the description. But let's go ahead and put these outdoorsy tools to the test in my new little forest of a yard. Let's take a quick look at the sheaths. Both of them come in what I would consider taco-style nylon belt sheaths. Pretty basic integrated belt loops that are sizable for larger belts and snap closures, which don't really like for martial implements, but for tools, yeah, it's okay. Now, an interesting bonus on the bigger one, I have actually found this sheath will fit a number of my other tools. So that's an unexpected value. Before we get into the action, let's take a quick close-up look of both tools individually. Now, they are both made out of 420HC stainless steel, but according to my test files, different hardness. The big one is somewhere between my 50 and 55 HRC files. I'm guessing around 52 HRC. Versus the companion knife, which is somewhere between my 55 and my 60. So maybe a 57, 58 HRC. Much harder. Actually, the 60 had a little trouble cutting it, so maybe closer to 60. And that would make sense. Utility knife that you want good edge retention with versus something you're going to abuse, so you don't want it to be brittle. Other specs on this though. All right, so overall weight of this piece is 17 ounces, 482 grams. Length, overall length, 17 inches, 43 centimeters. I wouldn't call it a full-size machete, maybe a fro, but blade length, I'm going to give you two measurements. Overall blade length is 12 inches, 30 centimeters, but the cutting edge is 9.5 inches, about 24.5 centimeters. Now, width at the widest point, 2 inches, 5 centimeters, it does taper out and get wider, and I found that that tip does have some very interesting usefulness. Thickness of stock, a shave over 4 millimeters thick. Now, it does have this sort of artificial handmade texture to it. I've seen a lot of tools like this coming out of China, but I don't know if it has any functionality. Might it help reduce drag bind through certain kinds of materials? Now, speaking of drag and bind, it does have a hollow ground edge, which is good for certain things and not so good for others, and we're going to see that in the performance test. Also does have a secondary edge bevel. It is not the sharpest blade. I would call it machete sharp, not shaving sharp. But for a chopper, that might be what you want. Could you improve this edge? Probably. Will I improve this edge? Probably. Speaking of improvement, all right, so scales on both, some basic wood scales. They're kind of thick and square, connected with two brass pins. Now again, a couple of measurements. Full length of this grip, 6 inches, about 15 centimeters, versus usable in the front of the grip, for me, 4.5 inches, more like 12 centimeters. Thickness, is going to be 3/4 of an inch, about 2 centimeters, whereas the width, the widest point, does have some shape to it, and we'll talk about how that feels in handling. 1.125, 3 centimeters right there. Point of balance on this thing is, I'm going to say, about a little over 2 inches into the blade, depending on where you're gripping it. So yeah, a little bit blade forward, but yeah, I think that's definitely by design. Let's take a look at the little one. Cosmetically, the blade very different from its bigger brother. You've got a mirror polished finish and a deeper artificial hand-hammered pattern on it. Again, functionally, is this a pro or a con? Can't really tell you. Is it pretty? Well, that's kind of up to you. I think it kind of works for this knife. Now, one thing that definitely works for this knife is the blade geometry, at least for me. You've got a really deep, straight clip, so that really does put the point forward, and we'll talk about that in utility and martial handling. You've got nice space on the back to put your thumb on and press. It's also one of these knives that has the relief cut up into the base of the blade, so you can grip it way up high, close to the edge. Speaking of that edge, I really like this geometry with belly and yes, some recurve. We'll take a look at how that works in slicing and carving. Now, like its bigger brother, it does have a hollow ground blade, does have a secondary bevel, but it's a whole lot keener. This is the slicey tool versus the choppy tool, and as I mentioned, it's also a harder HRC. But, okay, overall weight, 6 ounces, about 170 grams. Length of blade, 2 different measurements. Full length, 4.5 inches, about 11 centimeters, versus cutting edge, 4 inches, more like 10 centimeters. Now, it's really hard for me to figure blade width widest point, so I'm guesstimating maybe about right there. It's 1.5 inches wide, about 3 3/4 centimeters. Thickness of stock, hard to measure with the lumpiness of it, but I'm going to guesstimate about 4 millimeters. Length of grip, total length, 4 inches, about 10 centimeters, with, okay, measuring from this point to that point, 3 1/4 inches, about 8 centimeters. So that's tight. With my medium width hands, yeah, that just fits in there really snug. If your hands are bigger than mine, this is going to feel small. However, width of grip, yeah, it is again kind of squarish, even though they rounded the corners, and we'll talk about how it feels in a minute. Width of grip is 7/8 of an inch, about 2.5 centimeters. Thickness here at this point, 3/4 of an inch, about 2 centimeters. Overall length, 8 1/4 inches, 21 centimeters. All right, let's get to the action. Not the out-of-the-box edges, because I've already been using these and testing them, but let's see where they're at right now. Starting with the smaller companion knife that does indeed have the keener edge. Yeah, it is a slicey tool. And we'll see how it performs against more durable material. Well, speaking of which, how about some cardboard? Not bad. Big brother, though. Not designed to be slicey, but again, not out of the box edge, but current functioning edge. It's a little rippier, a little coarser, but not terrible, especially for a choppy tool. What about some cardboard? In that sense, I think its toothiness actually helps it a bit. Literally no point doing this with the bigger one, so it's a little awkward that way because of the curvature. Reverse grip. Ooh. Yeah. Directly into the redwood. Okay. Yeah, I've got to choke down and white and knuckle it because it's kicking my finger up into the base of the blade. Let's try it in reverse grip.
Okay, not so bad. Easier for it to stay put, not even having to put my thumb over the top of it. It's actually a sharp corner if I do. Bamboo test, little one first. That's a nice bite and rock to it. Let's try a reverse grip. Zero damage. How about Big Brother? A fear for the target. All right, getting a start on a new stick. I figure this one would be really good for shearing off the bark and chopping off some of these knots. Yeah, it's not bad. Let's try the smaller one. Look, I'm doing a bit of carving on it. Yeah. Squarish grip is actually nice for putting pressure on for carving. Might be able to improve this edge even further, but out of the box, I'm going to say it's not a bad tool. Yeah, look at that. It's doing a pretty good job as a carving tool. All right, let's bring it back this way and see how it does. Oh yeah. That's nice too. Love that curvature. Kind of a little recurve in the belly. That's pretty effective. It doesn't have the keenest edge for this. Definitely more of a chopper, or maybe I can improve it. So yeah, that is much better as a carving tool out of the box. This is a pretty hard piece of wood too. Oh yeah, see, look at that. Not doing too bad here. Let's chop on a thicker piece of wood. Oh my, yeah, that's a nice bite. Towards the tip. That's where I get my biggest bite. Problem is, as you can see, it does. That hollow ground edge stick into the media. Before I baton, I figure this will just chop right through this 3/4 inch dry ash branch. So let's go ahead and do that. Ooh. Yep. All right. What about batoning with it? All right. Smaller one. I'm going to try to use this one to chop with. Let's just try batoning with it. That angle with that slope tip just right. This is where that squarish grip gets kind of uncomfortable, I'm going to say. and also where that hollow ground edge just kind of gets stuck in this job. So a little bit higher up. All right, not good for that.
Summary of results, at least so far. Yes, I'm going to put these to a lot more testing. So far they've held up pretty good, and I can certainly see where each one excels and where each one, well, may not be so suited. This one definitely for slicing and carving. I've used it for food prep. It's great for food prep. The texture on the blade is really good to help certain fruits and vegetables, you know, the ones that you slice and they stick to the side of the knife, not stick to the side of the knife. So that's good. Cutting through cardboard works really well. I can get good purchase on this grip, even though it's kind of squarish in my hand. For utility tasks, it's very, very secure, easy to control, index the edge, which carries over into the carving tasks that I did, working on, you know, whittling down on my various staff making projects. Worked really well for that. Did some carving with it. Tried chopping a little bit, you know, taking off small branches it can do, but otherwise it's just not built for doing any chopping. In the more martial durability tasks, stabbing into first my Pell, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of brown paper bag paper up against my redwood target. Yeah, penetration was awesome, but especially in the forward grip, I was getting a lot of kick into the base of this blade. Sharp corners, not comfortable. Had to white knuckle it and really kind of choke down and stay away from that. When I tried to do it edge towards me North American Bowie style, the curvature of the build worked against me. I've talked about this with other knives that have this kind of curvature. Yeah, that's just way too awkward for me to make it effective. Same in reverse grip. Now in reverse grip, I didn't have as much painful collision with that relief cut in the blade. Tried getting my thumb up on the back of it. This corner actually bit me a bit, so I didn't feel good doing that. But yeah. Stabbing, thrusting, and I went ahead and took it a step further and stabbed it directly into the redwood target to see how a harder impact would feel and how that tip would hold up. It, well, yeah, bit me. But tip held up just fine. Penetration was good. And yeah, I also threw the thing. Not the best balance for a throwing knife. It is kind of awkward and tries to turn on you, and yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a throwing knife, but I was able to make it work as one. Took it to the bamboo test to see if I can induce a chip or a roll or fragile edge. Held up just fine. And I did this one before its big brother because I figured its big brother would destroy the bamboo. We'll talk about that in a second. Did some batoning with it. And okay, shape of the blade and the bevel on the back. That swedge combined with, okay, this is one of the drawbacks for me of a hollow ground blade in field use. Makes a great carvy, slicey edge, but when it comes to batoning through thicker material, thinner branches wasn't much of a problem, but batoning through thicker material, yeah, it gets in a certain distance, and then as that hollow grind starts to widen out, it just kind of gets stuck there. And yeah, no more forward progress. So not the best knife for batoning. But what about its big brother? Test summary for big brother. Did I do any stabbing or thrusting with it? Well, no. Did I throw it? No. Did I do any food prep with it? Yes, I did. Or at least tried to, and yeah, it has some potential as a big old slicey blade, but I use this little brother for that a whole lot more and more effectively. Same with cutting up cardboard. Can it do the job? Yes. Is it the most wieldy tool to do the job, especially on an extended basis when I have a lot of cardboard to cut up? No, I'm going to use a smaller knife for that. But taking it out into my forest of a backyard, this is where it really started to shine for the things it was good at, but also revealed some of the things it's not so good at. For small to medium chopping jobs, debarking, delimbing, cutting through branches that are 3/4 of an inch, couple of inches thick. It does really well. And in bigger branches, it does bite deeply. But this is where that hollow ground edge, which gives it a really good bite, starts to work against it. And I found this with all sorts of other hollow ground tools. That if that material is really binding as you bite into it, that yeah, when it starts to hit the apex of that hollow ground, it just sort of gets stuck. So the blade was getting stuck in the logs a lot and then not progressing any deeper when I tried to baton it through. It would just sort of sit there. Now, if I chop at it so I'll make a nice deep wedge in what I'm cutting through, will it get through it? Yes, absolutely, but it's a little more work than, say, doing it with a hatchet or something like that. But I was able to get a really good kind of snapping strike action using that tip to make it penetrate even better. And one place that came in surprisingly effectively was in dealing with this persistent invasion I have of blackberry vines in the yard. And the survivors of this war have adapted. These are the ones that have placed themselves in, shall we say, fortified positions, being protected by other plant life, or, yeah, I think the worst of them are the ones that are coming through my neighbor's chain link fence. So trying to reach them in these awkward spaces where they've got, you know, kind of shields up, I've actually found that this tip with a little short snapping stroke was really good at snipping those vines in tight, hard-to-reach places. And in doing that, it's quickly become my favorite tool. Before I talk about my Marshall impressions, let's talk about modification potential. I like to tinker with stuff here. If you've been watching my channel, you've seen it. Now, as for little brother, I could improve this edge. I don't think I really need to at this point. I will, for my own comfort, again, my delicate hands, probably round off the corners on this relief cut. Just reduce some of those uncomfortable collisions. Might also put, you know, some jimping on the ramp here for better purchase. As for these squarish grip scales, I expected them to be super uncomfortable, and they really weren't. Been watching my videos, you know that I don't really like big square grips, but on this design, and we'll talk about Big Brother in a second, kind of work for me. But I might do a little bit of rounding. And in that sense, I feel like this is a bonus. If I get a tool with oversized scales, it's much better to have them oversized than undersized, made out of wood or G10 or micarta, gives me material I can shave down. File, sandpaper, sanders, whatever I'm using, to custom fit it to, well, my rather picky, delicate hands. So I might do that a little bit on the small one, but the big one, I don't think so. Improve the edge? Yeah, probably I will. Turn this into maybe a functional cord cutter? Yeah, probably will. But even though this is a really squarish grip, under impact it was surprisingly comfortable. No hot spots. I don't think I'm going to make any changes to it. I might just leave it totally as is. Before I get into Marshall handling, I feel like I need to revisit value for the money. Could you get a decent functional machete for less than $40 US? Well, yes, absolutely. But there are things I really like about this geometry, especially what I can do with that tip. Now, I did take it out into my workshop and improve the secondary edge bevel on some fine sanding belts. So get back out, did some more chopping, and yes, it does bite into wood better now. Still wouldn't try to baton it through anything thick because of the way that hollow ground edge binds up in that kind of material. But I also have to appreciate the ergonomics. Under impact, this feels really good, and I have good control of it, and the build has held up just fine. If we look at the market for 4-inch fixed blade field use knives, it's pretty huge. And you could get a really good one for 40 US dollars or even significantly less potentially. Now, I did read some reviews where they said they bought the kit just for the machete and the knife was a happy bonus, which turned out to be pretty good for fine carving tasks, and that's what I found as well. For the finer carving and slicing, I really do like the way this knife feels. I like the geometry of the blade and the edge with that belly and recurve. Not really sold on that textured finish, but it hasn't got in my way or caused any problems either. I've also certainly reviewed a number of 4-inch folders, and when I get down to 4 inches in a blade for carry, I do tend to favor a folding knife, but most of the ones I reviewed are going to be, well, potentially more than 40 US dollars, so there's that. But let's talk about a couple of fixed blades that I have on hand to compare this to. First off, going back to, well, I did a couple of videos on this Condor Mini Hudson bag, and they weren't pretty. I wound up having to take a lot of steel off this edge to create an edge geometry that I could actually slice and carve with. Considering what I paid for the thing, a whole lot more than 40 US dollars, yeah, comparing these side by side for functionality makes me extra sad about this one. Let me talk about a few other knives that make me extra sad about this one. I recently reviewed the Peacemaker 3, which I would say out of the box is a keener, slicier knife. But when it comes to ergonomics, that guard does get in my way of me getting my thumb up on the back of the knife for fine carving leverage. Also didn't really like the ergonomics as much in doing tasks like food prep. So it ended up being really good for food prep. What about, well, recently reviewed the Mora Companion, significantly less than 40 US dollars. And I loved it as a slicing tool, utility tool, food prep tool, carving tool, and yeah, I was even able to baton with the thing. Incredibly durable, and love the ergonomics and utility of the grip. But there are certain things, again, I just like about having a geometry with some belly and recurve for some of the carving tasks I do. So it's kind of a give and take between these two, depending on what I'm doing, which one I might choose taking out with me. And both of them, I would say, well, combination of the build, the materials, and what, you know, they're worth, I'm not worried about anything happening to them. Not going to dwell too much on the Marshall because I don't feel like that's what these are designed for, but can they be used that way? Yes, absolutely. Plus you get that nice balance that I like so much between utility and Marshall usefulness. And this blade, we'll start small and go big. Tip geometry combined with that belly penetration into targets and channel into target media is really impressive. Now I did take a moment to round off the sharp corners at the base of the blade, took it back out, stabbed it into my wooden target, and I'm not getting that uncomfortable bite anymore. So that was an easy fix. I like how this angle gets the tip straight in line with my arm for thrusting, still effective for stabbing. And that belly, really good for slashing and hewing cuts. But it does have some drawbacks. Okay, I don't feel like it has enough mass. It's not blade forward enough for me to make any really good use out of snap cutting. Also, not much going on the back edge. I could hook a reverse stab around a corner in a pinch if I was entangled, so there's that. But there's not much there for back cutting. Could I actually sharpen that back edge? I could. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Actually, I kind of like when I'm carving, pressing on it, so I probably won't. But yeah, it's certainly not long enough to displace a blade. Yeah, hit with the flat, hit with the spine, anything like that. What about reverse grip? Well, we have to talk about transitions, and I'm going to say this is pretty awkward to transition. I would recommend not doing so, or doing it with two hands, but if you're going to use one hand, okay, when I pinch flip it, the shortness of the grip does kind of snag me a little bit. Now that relief cut does keep my hand from going up on the blade in a stab, even into really resistant media, but you'll see I risk making contact with edge when I'm flipping this thing around. So I'm going to default, if I'm going to do it with one hand, to a finger twirl, and even then I risk grabbing blade because it's a little short in my hand. But once it's in reverse grip, with the edge facing away from me, not only am I getting a good angle for a very powerful stab that makes a great channel into the target media, but I've got that belly for slashing at different angles. Now draw back to the overall curvature of the grip and the blade angle. We've talked about this with some other knives. If in forward or reverse grip I'm trying to use it edge towards me, forward grip North American Bowie style, yeah, it's curved back towards me too much. If I was at really close range, I could probably make some use out of it, but it's really telling me hold it edge forward. In reverse grip, it's even worse. Turn this blade around and it's pointed back towards me like I'm trying to stab myself, so really not getting any usefulness out of it in the reverse grip that way. Speaking of usefulness, yeah, it is a full tang knife. I could hit with the pommel of it. That would be fine. Base of the grip, use it for an impact tool. All right. The one you've probably been waiting for, though, is the bigger one. If you are familiar with or practice an art that uses something that's basically a chopper short swordish kind of a tool, you're probably going to take to this just fine. It's blade forward, it's got mass to it, so I feel like I can make a powerful hack, chop, could even slash given that tip geometry. And speaking of that tip geometry, I've already talked about in utility use how rocking it into a quick snap cut, yeah, that really bites that tip into a target very effectively in a very short space. So yeah, I really like that. Now I don't have a tip to stab or thrust with, or do I? If I change the angle of attack and come at it that way, I could make some use out of it. Kind of like I would do with a tomahawk. And yes, we are going to be getting into tomahawks soon, I promise. Stay tuned for that. I've got enough mass in the blade and length. I feel like I could potentially displace, parry, block an incoming weapon. I can hit with the flat, I can hit with the spine, even have a bit of a corner here I could strike with that way. Doesn't have a guard, but yeah, the ergonomics of the grip work just as well in martial handling as they do in utility chopping. And yeah, if I wanted to get really creative, combination of the two, a spada y daga. Got my closer range backup and yeah, my longer tool that I can also parry with, or I could reverse the knife into the reverse grip. Keep that for the really close range response, and this one for the longer action. So there's potential there as well. Something we're also going to get back to when we talk about tomahawks. Bottom line though, do I feel these are worth the money? I'm going to leave that up to you, but I'm really happy to have this set. I put it to a lot of use. I'm probably going to put it to a lot more use, and I'm not at all worried about it being exposed to the weather and used hard. So yeah, I feel like for the money, I'm glad I got my hands on these. Okay, did mention we're going to get into tomahawks and hatchets here soon. Until then, thank you all, as always, for watching, following my journey, putting up with my madness, liking, subscribing, adding to our conversation in the comments, and I hope to see you back for, well, maybe some tomahawk content.